This happened just a couple of months ago. It was the weekend and I was up late watching TV. I was in the living room of my apartment and relaxing after a long day of work. My apartment is not that big. It's basically one giant room with a kitchen at the front by the door and then the living room past that. I think that's a pretty standard setup. Then there's one bathroom and one bedroom off of that down the tiny hallway. So as I sat there feeling relaxed and having an ice-cold drink, I suddenly heard a knock at my apartment door. I didn't know who would possibly be there because I obviously was not expecting anybody. I looked over to the door but did not bother to get up. I figured that it was probably a mistake. Maybe somebody was trying to go to another apartment. After maybe 20 seconds, they knocked again. Then I heard a younger man's voice say, "DoorDash." Now, I did not order anything on DoorDash. In my mind, this was a simple mistake. One of my neighbors must have ordered food, and the delivery guy simply had his address mistaken. So I got up from the couch and started walking over to the door. My plan was to just tell the guy that he had the wrong place and to double check the address. When I got to the door, I opened it. But as soon as I did, I saw that there was not just one guy there, but there was 3 men. They were all dressed in dark clothing and had sweatshirts and jackets with hoods up. My door was open for literally half a second, and as soon as I started to open it, I thought better of it and began to close it. The main guy right at the door then went forward and tried to stop me, but he must have realized that he would have gotten the door slammed on his arm because he almost reached in and then didn't. After I slammed my door shut, I very quickly locked it. Pretty much the next second, the guy tried to open the door. Then I heard the other 2 guys get closer. They kept trying to open the door and then they started banging on it and kicking it as well. It was really loud and I thought that the door might break. So I quickly ran into the other room and then I got my phone and dialed 911. But the guys banging and trying to break in did not last long, because within probably a minute it stopped. Then I heard them all running away down the hallway. I told the police what was going on and they said they would have an officer there shortly. And the cops arrived pretty quick. It was probably within like 5 minutes. However, by that time the men were all gone. I'm not sure where they went, but they were no longer in the apartment complex. I assumed that it was an attempted robbery, but I don't know why they picked me. My apartment is just like all the others. I'm not rich or anything, so maybe it was just random. I'm just glad that I had fast instincts to close the door as soon as I had opened it, or else I think they might have barged their way in. I'm going to tell you the story of a really strange thing that happened a while back. This was 2 years ago, and I was living with a roommate named Mallory, who is one of my best friends. We're still good friends today, but no longer live together. So we lived in this 2-bedroom apartment on the first floor of the building. It was an average place. I liked the apartment because it had 2 bedrooms and a living room and kitchen in the middle. Mallory and I each had our own bedrooms as well as bathrooms which were connected to the bedrooms. Living in the apartment was fun. Sometimes the other friends in our friend group would come over and hang out. But one night, Mallory was gone late as she had to work, and then told me that she was going to her parents' after for dinner. I remember that I had to work late that night, and I arrived back at the apartment at roughly 9 p.m. After getting back, Mallory was still gone, so I was there by myself. I changed and then sat down on the couch with some food and started watching TV. I wasn't sure exactly what time Mallory would be back. As I was sitting on the couch and watching TV, I started to feel relaxed, but that feeling quickly went away. Out of nowhere, the TV that I was watching shut off. It was really strange. The power did not go out because the other lights remained on. I grabbed the remote and then turned the TV back on, but within probably 5 seconds, it shut off again. I knew that I did not touch the remote and I didn't know what was going on, so I got up and walked over to the TV. I'm not sure what I was looking for, if maybe a cord was becoming unplugged from the wall or something like that. It was really strange, and now that the TV was off, the apartment was completely quiet. As I was standing, I was closer to our back window. This looked out to behind the apartment complex, which had a walking path, and behind that was trees and people's backyards in a nearby neighborhood. The blinds were mostly closed, but standing by them you could sort of see between them. At a distance, it looked just dark outside, but now that I was close up, I suddenly saw a movement out of the corner of my eye. It was coming from outside, and I looked over and saw someone or something moving farther down. I went over to the window and moved some of the blinds and looked out. I was just on time to see a man running away really close to the apartment. I only saw his back as he was illuminated by other people's backlights being on. He was wearing a sweatshirt and hood which covered his head from the backside. He jogged away and was quickly out of sight. The man had been so close to my apartment, and there was no way that he had just been out walking on the trail. That was about 50 feet away. For some reason, he was deliberately right behind my apartment. I stayed there watching for a while, and he did not return. After that, I turned the TV back on, and it did not turn right back off. In fact, it didn't turn off by itself at all anymore. I sat on the couch and continued to watch TV, wondering if it would turn back off, but it never did. About 30 minutes later, Mallory got back home. I told her about the strange occurrences. We concluded that the man that ran away was most likely right outside of our window, and he must have had a remote and turned the TV off for some reason. With Roku TVs which we had, the remotes tend to work with all the other televisions, so that's very possible. But the question that I have is why? Was it just a funny prank? I found it to be really creepy, especially that hour at night, and I'm really glad that it never happened again after that. This was something that happened back when I was a kid. I was 8 years old at the time, but I remember it pretty well. So I have an older sister who is a few years older than me. I remember that it was a weekend and my sister was sleeping over at a friend's house that night, so it was just me and my parents at home. I remember that night we all went into the living room and were watching a football game. I really enjoyed watching the game with my parents, especially my dad, who knows a lot about sports. At halftime, I left the living room and went to go outside into the backyard. I was a really active kid and always liked to go into our backyard and practice sports. We had a pretty small backyard, but it had nice short grass and was completely fenced in with a sort of high wooden fence, so I would always be back there tossing the ball around or something. I remember that I left the living room, went through the kitchen, and then got to the back door. As soon as I stepped out into the backyard, I saw a man back there. There was this guy who I had never seen before just standing in the backyard about 20 feet away from me. As soon as I saw him, I just turned right back around and then went back inside the house. Looking back, I'm not sure what exactly I was thinking. Maybe I thought the guy must have been a neighbor, but for some reason, I seemed to assume that the man was not up to no good, but had a logical reason for being in our backyard. Maybe it was because he was just wearing normal clothes and looked like an average guy. Maybe I thought that if he was some criminal that he would be wearing a ski mask or something. I was a shy kid and just decided to walk away without questioning him or saying anything. In my second or two in the backyard, the man did look at me but did not say anything at all. So I got back inside and went straight for the living room where my parents were. Once I got back there, I felt safe again. However, I did not even bother to lock the back door or anything, which makes me mad at my younger self looking back. But as an 8-year-old kid, you don't always think the best. I continued to watch TV with my parents, now watching the halftime report. We were all on the couch, and maybe 5 minutes later during a commercial break, I just barely heard what sounded like the back door opening. You could not see it from the living room where we were, and I could just barely hear it. It sounded like the door was being opened very slow and deliberately. I had no idea that the man who was in our backyard would try to enter our house. This immediately creeped me out. My parents did not seem to hear the door opening at all. They were still just sitting on the couch and watching TV and chatting. Moments later, I thought I heard footsteps, so I decided to mention the man in the backyard. I told my parents about what happened, and when I went outside, my dad said that he would get up and go look. When he started walking over to the kitchen, we all heard footsteps quickly moving away. But the footsteps were not going back outside. They were moving farther into the house towards my parents' bedroom. My dad heard this, and I think he maybe saw the guy for a second too. I heard him say something like, "Who are you?" Then he turned back and quickly went into the living room. He told my mom and I to go down into the basement and to lock the door of whatever room we went in. He also told my mom to call the police. Then I saw him go back over towards my parents' bedroom. I went with my mom quickly downstairs and we went into the bathroom down there and locked the door. I was pretty scared. About 5 minutes later, my dad came down and said that the police were on the way. He said that some random guy was in our house and he basically chased him out of it. My dad wasn't hurt or anything, the guy didn't try to fight him, and nothing was stolen either. The cops got there a short time later. My parents talked with the police and I told them what I saw as well. I learned a lesson to always lock the doors and stuff like that. After that, nothing else similar happened. Looking back, I wonder what that guy's plans were. It really creeps me out that even after seeing me and figuring that my parents were probably home, he still decided to go inside our house. This is something that happened not too long ago. I was at home with my wife and we were in the living room together watching a movie. By this point, it was a little bit later. Our living room is at the front of the house, and behind our couch is the front windows. We were both sitting on the couch, and as the movie was going on, my wife and I were very focused on it. At one point, the entire TV screen went black during the film. This was part of the movie, but for this few seconds there was a reflection on the screen because of it, and we could sort of see ourselves. But then I noticed something behind us. I couldn't see well at all, but it appeared as though somebody was at the window. I turned around and looked out of our large living room window. When I did, I saw a man quickly move to the side and go out of my view. My wife turned around too and asked what that was. I told her that I saw a guy at the window, and this guy had been like right on the other side looking in. I didn't see any details about him or what he looked like really. It all happened so fast. So I got up from the couch and I paused the movie. My wife then covered the window with the shades. I didn't know who this guy was or why he was on our property, but I figured that I should do something. So I decided to go outside and see if the guy had left or not. I walked over to the front door, which was just feet away from the window. I opened it and then stepped outside. When I looked around, I did not see the guy. I looked along the front of our house and he was not there. So either he left our property entirely or had gone around to the backyard or something. I called out asking if anybody was there. There was no response. Trying to sound tough, I loudly said, "Whoever you are, get off my property." I looked around and still heard and saw nothing. So I figured at that point that he was gone, and I didn't want to be outside anymore as I was admittedly a little creeped out. But before I went back inside, I heard my wife yelling from somewhere in the house. I quickly went back in and heard her calling my name. She was towards the back end of the house and told me that the guy tried breaking in. I walked over towards our back door, and when I got over there, I saw the guy running through the yard out the window. He left our backyard and then hopped the fence into a neighbor's yard. I decided right then and there to call the police. I got the phone and dialed 911. When I reported what happened, I was told that police were already on the way to our neighborhood. I was sort of confused at first. A short time later, though, the cops got there. When they arrived, there was like 4 police vehicles. One of them stopped in front of our house, and the others went to other neighbors on the street. The officer that went to our house told me that multiple other neighbors had called the cops. There had been reports of a man attempting to break into houses. I realized that our house must have not been the only one that he was at. The police searched the area, and the man was located hiding in someone's backyard at the end of the block. It was a crazy situation. When I had gone outside to look for the guy, my wife had heard someone trying to open the back door. Thankfully, it was locked. That's when she called for me. Prior to the man looking in our window, I guess he was in another neighbor's backyard and was pounding on their window. They ended up waking up, and when the lights turned on, he ran. They called the cops, and that's why the police were already on the way. I'm not sure who the guy was or why he was trying to break into houses in our neighborhood, but I'm really glad that he was caught. One night, I was home alone watching a movie on TV. I'd been flipping through the channels until I found something interesting, like I often do. I live by myself in an apartment, and it's a pretty average place for the most part. As it got to be late at night, I was starting to get tired. Out of nowhere, randomly, there was a knock on my apartment front door. At first, I thought that it was one of my neighbors complaining about the noise. The volume of the movie on my TV was pretty loud, to be honest. So I quickly turned it down and then got up from the couch and walked over to the front door. Before opening the door, I looked through the peephole. I saw a young woman standing there. She looked to be in her 20s, had dark hair and a few tattoos on her arms. I didn't recognize her, but then again, I didn't know most of my neighbors. Thinking she was still a neighbor, I opened the door. Before she said anything, I said, "Sorry, I didn't realize I had the volume so loud." In my mind, I was 100% sure that she was complaining about the noise because I had no idea what on earth else a neighbor would be at my door for. She looked confused for a moment and then said, No, that's fine. Then she told me that she was in an awkward situation. She said her boyfriend had accidentally backed into my car in the parking lot. Her boyfriend was apparently over at the car and didn't want to leave the scene, so she came in to tell me. I parked my car in the same spot every day in the parking lot, and it was out there and our lot was sort of small. Things would get crowded with cars, so I was sort of annoyed by this, but was also glad that the woman was telling me about it and they didn't just drive away. I told her 1 second I would go and get my phone, and she said okay. I needed my phone for insurance stuff and to take pictures of the damage. I quickly went back into my apartment, and my phone was still on the couch in the living room. When I got it, I was now at the back end of my apartment and near my balcony. There was a large window, and from there you could see most of the parking lot and sort of the area where I parked. I was curious, so I went over and looked out of the window. I saw the parking lot, and it seemed completely quiet. When I looked to where my car was, I could just barely see it, but I could in fact see it, and it appeared to be just fine. There was nobody standing around it and no car right next to it or anything. I couldn't see any damage. Suddenly, this whole thing seemed really sketchy. I went back to the door and opened it again. The woman was still there. I asked her how much damage there was to the car. She said it was pretty bad and we better go to the car now. There definitely was not a lot of damage on my car. I told her that she must be mistaken. She mentioned my full name and asked if that was me. I said yes, and then she confirmed that yes, it was my car that had been hit. I was confused. I explained to her that I just saw my car out the window and it didn't look like there was any damage on it at all. She looked at me but did not say anything. Then the woman just turned and walked away without saying a word. She was quickly gone. I went back inside my apartment. Then I looked out the window again towards the parking lot. Things were really quiet there for a minute or two, but I continued watching. I saw the same woman as well as a man come into my view. Both of them walked into a random car which was not even close to mine and then quickly drove away. I was really creeped out by the whole thing. I had never seen that woman before in my life prior to that night. I couldn't help but feel that she was trying to set me up. She was with a guy, and maybe they were going to try to rob me or something. I'm really glad that I didn't follow her. But how did she know which car was mine? Or how did she know my name? That part is something that I still don't know. This happened just last summer. I live by myself in what I would describe as a typical apartment. I have one bedroom, a bathroom, kitchen, and living room pretty much. It's inside of a building in a fairly large apartment complex. So one night, I worked sort of late into the night at my job. I was really tired from the long day and pretty much just arrived home, took a quick shower, and went to bed. That was around midnight. However, I woke up at roughly 4 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, I wanted to get more sleep, but I was wide awake. I was also very thirsty and felt dehydrated. Sometimes, mostly in the summer, I wake up in the night because of dehydration, and obviously on this night I had worked late and not been able to drink as much. Then usually I drink some water and feel better immediately and then go right back to sleep. But some of the times when I wake up, I'm wide awake and can't go back to sleep right away, and this was one of those times. So what I usually do when that happens is get up and go into the living room and watch TV until I get sleepy again. That might be 15 or 30 minutes usually. So that was what I did on this night. I got out of bed, drank some water, immediately felt better, and then sat on the couch and turned on the TV. My couch is to the right of the front door to the apartment, about 20 feet away. I remember that when I sat down, I glanced over and happened to notice that my door was actually unlocked. I realized that I somehow had forgotten to lock it. Normally, I always remember, but I guess I forget sometimes. I went over and locked the door and then went back to the couch. I started watching TV and waited for myself to feel sleepy again. I was flipping around the channels for maybe 5 minutes when suddenly I heard a noise. Obviously, it was very quiet other than the noise from the TV, but the sound I heard was somebody trying to open the front door to my apartment. I really couldn't believe it, and I had no idea who it could be. I sat and listened, but didn't hear anything else. Then, after a moment, I got up and I walked over to the door. I looked out of the peephole, but nobody was there. Then I opened up my apartment door and looked into the hallway. That's when I saw him. There was a man wearing a hooded sweatshirt walking away from me down the hallway. He was mostly looking down at the ground, and then he went to another door and tried opening it, but this one was also locked. I watched him go to another door and try that one as well. Apparently, he hadn't noticed me opening the door. I didn't know who this guy was, but he was seemingly trying to get into any apartment. As he reached the end of the hallway, he suddenly looked behind him and then he saw me. When he did, I quickly closed the door. I was afraid that he would come back, but he didn't. Soon after, I went back to bed. I'm really glad that I woke up when I did that night and locked my door, or who knows what could have happened. One time, I was home by myself and watching TV. I was very relaxed, sitting on the couch in the living room and just enjoying a movie. The volume was kinda loud on the TV, and I was having some popcorn. To that point, I had been home for several hours, and it was a good night. As the movie went on, I remember that there was a really quiet part. Just during that, I thought I heard the sound of something coming from the other room. It got my attention, and I was slightly concerned for a moment, until I realized it was probably just my cat. He was always moving around the house, so I didn't pay it much thought. Several minutes later, though, at another quiet spot in the movie, I heard the sound from the other room again. It just didn't really sound like my cat, but what else could it be? I looked around, and then I saw that my cat was sleeping on the living room floor in the same room as me. That made me realize that the sound I heard in the other room was not the cat. I got a bad feeling, wondering what it could be. I paused the movie and listened closely. When I did, though, I stopped hearing anything for about a minute or two. Then I heard something again. It sounded like somebody was quietly walking through the kitchen, farther away. I couldn't see that area of the house from where I was. I stayed where I was on the couch, wondering if I should call the police or what. For several minutes, though, I didn't hear anything more. So at that point, I was wondering if I had gone crazy or if a person was actually in my house. I hadn't heard anything in a while, so I decided to just go to my kitchen and look. When I walked over there, things were still quiet. Then, as I reached the end of the living room, I heard somebody walking again. Whoever was in my house quickly made their way to the basement door and then opened it. As I looked into the room, I just barely saw the door closing and then heard someone going down the stairs. This confirmed to me that an intruder was in my house and they were now going in my basement. I sprinted out of the room. Then I ran to the other staircase and went up to where my bedroom was. I locked myself in the room and then called the police from my cell phone. They said that they would send someone over right away and that it would be about 10 minutes. I felt better, but I would not be able to feel completely safe until the police were there and the person was out of my house. As I was in my bedroom waiting, after maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I heard the sound of someone walking on the main level of the house. I didn't know if this was the person leaving or what, but the fact that I was hearing them at all worried me. I hoped that they would have just stayed in the basement and the cops could find them there. Then I heard the footsteps reach the bottom of the staircase. Whoever was there then began walking up. Now I was really worried. They slowly walked up the stairs, and then it was like they made a beeline for my bedroom door. They went right up to it, and then tried opening the door, which thankfully had a lock on it. When this happened, I desperately wanted the police to get there now, but they weren't there yet. The person walked away from the door and then back downstairs. I felt slightly better, but they still didn't leave. I heard them just walking around all over the main floor for several minutes, until at last the police arrived. The cops entered the house, and within seconds I heard multiple voices. After a while, when it was safe, I went downstairs. I saw that there were several officers there. They had found a man inside my house who I did not know. I was told that he was likely trying to rob my place. Luckily, he hadn't done any damage or anything. How he got inside of the house, I do not know. I'm really grateful that I came out of that situation all right. The scariest part to me is that the guy went up to my bedroom when I was in it. This is something that took place back when I was a kid. I believe I was about 10 years old, and at the time I lived with my parents and older sister. We lived in a normal 2-story house in a pretty populated but generally safe neighborhood. So it was a Saturday morning and I was up early. I don't remember why I woke up early, if I had planned to or if I just happened to. It was like 7 a.m. though, and nobody else in the house was awake yet. This was before smartphones and streaming services and all that, so my favorite thing to do was watch TV. I remember that I went downstairs into the living room and turned on the TV. I was watching some kids shows in the living room and just relaxing and enjoying it. The sun had literally just risen as well. So probably 30 minutes into my watching TV, there was a knock on the front door. Being a kid, when I heard it, I got scared. I had no intentions of answering or even looking to see who it was. I stayed on the couch and did not have a view of the front door area from where I was. After maybe 30 seconds to a minute, there was another knock. I had hoped that the person would just go away. After the second knock, though, I didn't hear anything for a couple minutes. My curiosity got the better of me, and I got up from the couch and walked over to the front door. I carefully approached and then looked out of the window next to the door to the front step. There was a man standing there. I would have expected whoever it was to be gone by now. I jumped back upon seeing him, and I didn't think that he saw me. I ran out of the room and back towards the living room. At that point, I remember hearing the man attempting to open the front door, which was locked. I had no idea who he was or what he wanted, but it really creeped me out now that he was trying to get inside. I was about to run upstairs and wake everybody up when I thought that maybe I heard the guy walking away. I slowly and quietly went back over to the front of the house, just close enough to look outside. This time, it seemed as though the man was gone because I didn't see him. I went closer and looked out of the window and still didn't see the guy. I realized that he probably walked away after realizing that nobody was going to answer the door and that he couldn't get inside. That made me feel a little better, and I went back into the living room. I really didn't want to wake everybody up, and I figured that they would be getting up soon on their own anyways. So I watched TV in the living room for a while longer. However, I was once again interrupted. This time, I heard another knock on the front door. It was much quieter than before though, but still obvious enough because of how quiet things were. This knock was steady and did not stop. It was a constant, soft knocking, which went on for at least 30 seconds straight. I just sat there at first, not knowing what to do. Then I stood up and was trying to decide whether I would run upstairs or go and look to see who was there at the door. I figured that it was probably the same guy, but obviously I didn't know for sure. I ended up just standing up in the living room though and not really moving. Then the knocking finally stopped. I waited another 30 seconds or so and then walked to the front end of the house again. As soon as I got near the front door, I could see the same man was standing there. Then he moved to the side window right next to the door and looked through it right at me. He was clearly seeing me, and the guy was waving me over. When I saw that, I turned around and ran for the stairs. I went upstairs and woke up everyone. When we all went back downstairs though, the man was gone, and he did not return. Nobody knew who he was. After I described him to my parents as best as I could, they still had no idea who it could be. I'm really glad that he didn't get into the house, and that I didn't answer the door. I'm not sure what he wanted, because he certainly didn't seem like a door-to-door salesman or anything, and the time with it being just after 7 a.m. is a bit early for that sort of stuff. I'm just glad that I never saw him again. Not too long ago, I was watching YouTube videos with my girlfriend. We were at my apartment just hanging out at night. I have an apartment that's not the greatest. It's on the first floor, and I have a little patio that goes outside from the living room through a sliding glass door. Overall, it's fine though. So like I said, my girlfriend was over and we were just sitting on the couch watching TV. We watch YouTube or whatever all the time. It was probably like 9 p.m. or so. Suddenly, the screen went black for a moment, and then we were seeing some random phone screen. We were both very confused at first, but soon realized that someone must have connected their phone to my TV by mistake. There's a lot of apartment units close by, so you can connect to other people's devices if you really want to. We were seeing the phone screen of whoever this was going through their apps. I figured they would disconnect after realizing they were connected to my TV and not their own, and I expected the screen to return to what we were doing. In the meantime though, I was kind of interested to see what this person was doing, so I didn't bother to get up and turn off the TV or anything. The person then went into the Photos app on their phone. Then they started scrolling through them one at a time. It didn't take me long to see myself among these photos. There were pictures taken straight from my social media pages, such as Facebook and Instagram, just screenshots of them. And then there were pictures of my girlfriend as well. All kinds of pictures of both of us, from both my Facebook and her Facebook as well. And the more this went on, the more confused and creeped out we were. There were probably 10 photos of each of us, and this went on for several minutes. My girlfriend and I were talking to each other in disbelief, wondering who this was and what they were doing. Then, just like that, their phone disconnected. My TV returned to its home screen, and I was left wondering what on earth had just happened. But less than 5 minutes later, as my girlfriend and I were talking to each other trying to figure out what was going on, there was suddenly a knock at my apartment door. I rarely get anybody knocking on the door, so as soon as it happened, we both stopped talking instantly. After a moment, I got up and walked over to see who was there. When I got there, I didn't see anybody. I was even more paranoid now. I figured whoever had connected to the TV had just knocked on my door. We were very confused, and eventually sat back down on the couch and tried to forget about it. We went on the YouTube app again and tried to play a video to take our mind off of things. Meanwhile, my sliding glass door in the room was mostly covered by blinds, but there was about 2 feet at the end that wasn't, as they weren't closed all the way. A few minutes into watching YouTube again, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye. You couldn't really see anything outside with some light being on in the apartment and it being dark out, but I did notice that someone was really close to the window in the opening of the blinds. I looked closer, and the person came closer. Then I realized that there was a man wearing a black ski mask with his face right on the other side of the glass, looking in. My girlfriend noticed him just after me and screamed. She got up and ran out of the room, as I stood up and backed away in shock. Then, very quickly, the masked man turned and ran off into the night. I went over and closed the blinds entirely. Then I made sure that every door and window was covered and locked and all that. I was very paranoid for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. And since then, there have been no other occurrences like that. It could have just been an elaborate prank, but that was a little bit far to be taking things in my mind. And I also have no idea who would do that kind of a prank to us. My girlfriend and I still get a little bit worried that something like that might happen again when we're at my place at night. And we also have no clue who it was that could have done it. I'm just hoping that they don't return. This happened about 4 years ago now, but it's something that I will never forget. So I lived with a roommate at the time, and we both rented this one house. It was a somewhat small house in a pretty typical residential neighborhood. I don't live there anymore and have since moved out. But one night, I found myself home alone as my roommate went out of town. I was sitting in the living room and watching NCIS on TV. Out of nowhere, I heard my phone vibrating, indicating that I had received a text. I picked it up and looked at it to see that I had a text from an unknown number. The text said, "I also like NCIS." I was very confused at first, not knowing who sent that to me or what they were talking about. Then I realized that possibly someone was spying on me. My TV was in the living room and it faced the front window, so if you looked inside from the outside, you could see what was on TV. I quickly looked behind me to the street out front. At first, I didn't really see anything suspicious, but I soon realized that there was a car parked across on the other side of the street. It was not uncommon for cars to be parked on the street, but I didn't recognize this one at all. I moved closer to the window and looked, but I really couldn't tell if anybody was inside of it or not. So I closed the curtains completely, which covered the windows and would not allow anybody to see in. Meanwhile, I texted the number back, asking who it was. Several minutes later, I got a reply. The new text said, "I'm not allowed to watch anymore?" I once again asked who it was, but they did not reply to me. A while later, I looked out of the window again, and the car was still there. Then I got another text. It said, "I saw you looking at me. What do you want?" I didn't know what to say, and I didn't reply, but I was very worried now. They texted again within another minute and said, "Why don't you come outside?" This one was enough for me to block the number, and I did. A while later, I looked out of the window again. This time, the car was gone. I looked out several more times that night, but did not see the car again. The rest of the time that I lived in that house, nothing strange like that happened again. I also didn't see the car either. I still wonder about it though. Who was that was texting me, and how did they get my number? Also, what would have happened if I had gone outside? About a year ago, I was sitting on my couch watching TV. I live alone in what I would describe as a pretty average house in a pretty average neighborhood. It was nighttime and probably about 10 o'clock. I had been on the couch for about an hour to that point. All of a sudden, the TV just turned off. I thought it was really strange. The remote was on the coffee table a few feet away from me. I did have two remotes though. One was just for the TV and the other was for the cable, but it could also turn the TV on and off. My only guess was that the TV remote must be in the couch and I sat on it or something. I never really used the remote that was just for the TV, and I wasn't even quite sure where exactly it was. I got up and moved around my couch cushions, but nothing was there. I looked around my coffee table and TV stand, but the remote wasn't there either. Then, I got the cable remote and turned the TV back on. I sat back down and resumed. Sometimes TVs have random problems and turn off on their own, right? About 15 minutes went by, and suddenly, my TV turned off again. This was beginning to annoy me, but when the TV turned off, it made things completely silent in my house. That's when I thought I heard a quiet laughter from a ways away. Most of the lights in my house were off, other than one in the living room. I got up and didn't know if I was hearing things or what. I turned on another light, and then made my way through the living room, looking to the rest of the house. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, and I didn't hear anything else either. The situation was kind of creeping me out though. I went back over to my couch and turned the TV on again. This time, I went into the settings to check if it was some kind of weird mode where it would automatically turn off. As I was doing so, the TV turned off once again. I turned it back on, only for it to shut off immediately. This time, I heard a creepy sounding laugh again, but it was much more clear, and I could tell that it was coming from inside my house. I looked behind me to where the noise was coming from. Then I saw somebody. It looked like a man was halfway hiding behind a wall and looking at me. It was really dark in the direction that he was in, but I saw him, and then he disappeared around the corner. My heart started racing. I wasn't sure what to do for a few moments. Then I had the thought to call the police. Whoever was there was in the area of my bedroom, so I stayed put in the living room. When somebody answered my call to 911, I said my address as quietly as I could, and then said that there was somebody in my house. I then hung up because I was paranoid that whoever was inside would hear me. I kept my eyes on the location that the man had been at in case he were to come back. I didn't have any place to hide, and I was just hoping that I would not see him again. Things were silent for a few minutes. Then I heard footsteps inside the house, but they were out of my sight. I then heard a door shut. It was coming from my hallway. It could have been my bedroom door or the guest bedroom. I stayed where I was, and my heart was still racing. Things became silent again. I remained there for what felt like an extremely long time. At last, I saw the police arrive out front of my house. When they got to the door, I ran over and let them in. I let them know that I heard a door close in my hallway, and I thought that the guy went in there. The police searched the house, but they didn't find anyone. However, the window in my guest bedroom was open. Nothing was taken from my entire house, though. After the police searched the house and my property, they left. I couldn't help but feel scared when I was alone again. I kept thinking that I would see or hear the guy inside my house once more. I didn't, though. Eventually, I found my other TV remote in the guest bedroom. No doubt that guy had it and was messing with me. I don't know how or why he came into my house, though. I also don't know who he was. It remains a mystery. Back a couple of years ago, I lived in a smaller 2-bedroom house with a roommate. I only lived in that house for 1 year before I moved due to my job. I had some memorable experiences living there, but none as much as what I'm about to tell you. This was just about a month after I started living there. I really didn't get to see my roommate a whole lot because he would often work nights and I would often work during the day. On nights that I would hang out at our house, I would have the TV on in the living room and I would watch whatever I wanted. One thing that started happening though was somebody would start casting to my TV. Random videos would start playing, like YouTube videos or whatever. It happened probably 4 different times. I figured that it was the next door neighbor. The houses were all pretty close together, and maybe it was done by mistake, or maybe it was somebody trying to be funny. I wasn't quite sure who lived next door. Maybe they had kids, or maybe it was an honest mistake. It was slightly annoying, but beyond that, I didn't really care. But one night, I was home by myself watching TV again. It wasn't too late, but it was dark out. I was relaxing after a long day of work and watching a movie.
Suddenly, the movie paused and I could see that somebody was casting to my TV again. The screen changed, and this time, it looked like the screen of somebody's phone. The picture on the screen then went vertical and I saw somebody's camera. There was a face of a man and he was smiling and seemingly looking right at me. He appeared to be outside somewhere, and the guy had dark hair and was wearing sunglasses for some reason. Beyond that, the quality of the picture wasn't very good. I could hear the noise from his camera too, but he wasn't speaking. It sounded as though he was walking down a street. I wondered how and why I was watching some random person walk down the street while smiling at the camera. Then the camera angle turned and it showed a house. It took me a few seconds before realizing that it was my house. I got up and looked out the front window. I saw a man standing out in the street. When I saw him, I quickly ducked down. Then I looked back at my TV. The camera turned around to the man who had an uncomfortably large smile on his face. He then walked up through my front yard towards the house. When I saw this, I grabbed the remote, turned the TV off, and ran up the staircase. I got upstairs just in time to hear the doorbell ring. It ringed like 10 times in a row though, with barely any pause in between. That was followed by a constant knocking on the front door. I stayed upstairs and closed the door to my bedroom so that I wouldn't hear it. Still, I could barely hear the knocking, and it continued for several minutes. I had no idea who the guy was. I didn't recognize him at all, and I didn't think he was a neighbor, but it was possible. Whoever he was though, he had freaked me out by basically hacking my TV and being so weird. I was going to ignore him until he went away. There was no chance that I was going to go down and see what he wanted. I put in some headphones and started watching videos on my phone. That way, I wouldn't be bothered by the guy anymore. I also texted my roommate and let him know what was going on. After about an hour, I left my room and didn't hear anything anymore. I figured that the guy finally left, although I was still very curious as to what he was doing there in the first place. I walked back down the stairs and into the living room. As soon as I got in there though, I saw the man looking right inside the window. He was smiling. I jumped back when I saw him and went right back upstairs. This time, I called the police. I couldn't take it anymore, and I told them the whole story. But by the time the police got there, you guessed it, the man was gone. I never found out who he was. I also don't know why he kept connecting to my TV. I asked my roommate if it ever happened when he was watching TV, and he said no. So apparently this guy only wanted to mess with me. I'm just glad he didn't cause any real trouble. This happened years ago, but I still remember the whole event very clearly. I was in college at the time and had my own apartment that I rented on the 4th floor. The apartment was off campus, but less than a mile away. I would hang out with friends a lot on the weekends, but not as much during the week. We would always be busy with homework and classes, so at night I was more likely to spend it at my apartment. One night, I finished my homework and was watching TV in my apartment living room. It was sort of late, and I remember that I heard the doorknob rattling to my unit. I got up right away and walked over to the door. I had absolutely no idea why anybody would try to enter my apartment. In total, it took maybe 10 seconds for me to get to the door. The noise stopped almost instantly though when I started walking over, and by the time that I got there and looked out the peephole into the hallway, nobody was there. I went back to watching TV, only for this same thing to happen maybe an hour later. This time, I walked out into my hallway and took a few steps and looked around. I listened as well, but nobody was there and I didn't hear anything strange. I then went back inside to my apartment, made sure my door was locked, and soon after got ready for bed. The next day I got up and went to my classes like normal. I would spend much of the mornings and early afternoons on campus, in classes or studying. I would also try to get as much homework out of the way as possible in that time. That night, I got back home and was watching TV sitting on my couch once again, just like the previous night. I remember that I was just flipping through the channels, watching several different things throughout the night. But at one point, I do remember hearing like a random noise. I couldn't tell exactly where it came from, but my building was kind of old in general, and sometimes pipes or whatever would make noise. Not long after that at all though, I heard another noise. It was from inside my apartment, and when I looked over to the direction of it, I saw my closet door opening. Then a man emerged. I had never seen this guy before. He was tall, wore a black shirt and black pants. He had a somewhat longer beard and shorter hair. When he walked out, he was looking right at me. I jumped up from my couch and stood up. He was maybe 20 feet away from me. At about the same exact time, without either of us saying anything, He started charging towards me, and I started running away in the opposite direction. I ran for my front door. The man gave chase, and I swung the door open about 2 seconds before he got to me. I felt him grabbing at my left arm as I tried pushing the door shut behind me. I was able to get loose from the man's grip, and I ran down the hallway screaming. The guy was right behind me, and I was yelling as loud as I could, knowing he would probably catch up to me. The hallways were pretty long, and I saw a door start to open up ahead. I noticed that one of my neighbors was opening their door and looking out into the hallway, probably from the yelling. When they looked out, the man stopped chasing me. He stopped and started walking instead. I kept running for a bit, and I asked my neighbor to call the police and pointed to the guy, saying that he broke into my apartment. I finally slowed down and started walking when I felt safer. The guy was still standing back there, and he denied it and then began walking in the opposite direction. My neighbor didn't know what was going on, but he finally agreed to call the police. I watched the guy walk to the end of the hallway and then to the stairs. I returned to my apartment later, and the police arrived a short time after that. However, the man was probably gone by then. When they got there, I spoke to officers for quite a while, telling them everything. Luckily, they found the man not too long after that. The guy actually worked at my apartment building and had only recently been hired. I was so glad not to have to worry about him anymore, because I don't know how he got inside my apartment, and I would have been afraid for him to come back.
I was around 12 when this happened. It was a Saturday morning, and my parents were out of town for the weekend. They left my older brother to babysit, but as soon as they left, he did too. So I was sitting in the living room watching TV when the doorbell rang. Instead of looking through the peephole like a normal person, I flung open the door, eager for company. I thought it would be my neighbor friends, not two middle-aged men looking down at me. They asked if my parents were home, and I didn't even hesitate when I told them, no, they're actually out of town for the weekend. I don't know why, but it slipped out, and if I could scold the kid version of myself now, I would. They exchanged glances, and the older-looking man said, well, I'm your landlord, and we need to come inside and check a few things out. That's when I realized how much trouble I was in. I knew my landlord. He was a friend of the family, and he was not either of the men standing in front of me. Thank goodness for quick thinking, because I told them, yes, but I need to grab something first. And before they could reply, I shut the door and deadbolted it. I ran into the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and dialed my mom's number. She picked up, and the second I heard her voice, I broke down sobbing. I explained very quickly about the two guys at the front door and that they wanted to come in. I told her the one said he was the landlord, but I knew it wasn't, and I told her I was scared and for her to come home now. Then I heard pounding on the window. My mom heard it too, because the next thing she told me was that my dad was on the phone with the police, and I needed to make sure that the two men knew that. Through my tears, I yelled as loud as I could, "The cops are on their way," towards the window where the two men were standing. They responded by the window and said, "Hey, we're not going to hurt you, no need to cry. It's okay, we will leave." After that, it was just silence, and I couldn't see them anymore, as I assumed they had left. It seemed like a lifetime, but it was no less than 10 minutes later when the police arrived. My parents pulled into the driveway eventually, and my mom hugged me tighter than she ever had before. I was crying, and she was crying. I got a lecture on opening the door for strangers and how lucky I was to be alive, and my brother got yelled at and grounded. The cops took a report and surveilled the area for the two men, but never found them. I learned my lesson that day. I have no idea who those two men were or what their intentions were, and I don't ever care to find out. I live alone in a small house that I rent, and this happened just a few weeks ago. So, one night I was watching TV by myself in the living room. I was sitting on the couch and just having a relaxing night. For some context, the living room is at the front end of my house. My couch is against the large living room window which looks out to the front yard. So, as I sat on the couch, the window was directly behind me. It's a very long window that stretches across much of the room. There are curtains on each side that can be closed, but to be honest, I'm too lazy to close them most of the time. So when I go to bed, I just shut the lights off. So there I was, sitting on the living room couch and watching television. Out of nowhere, I heard a knocking coming from right behind me. Somebody was knocking on my window. It really startled me, and I quickly looked back. When I did, I saw this man standing there in the bushes. He was right on the other side of the glass, like 3 feet away from my head. The man was wearing a sweatshirt and a jacket as well. Both hoods were up far, covering most of his face. It was a kind of rainy night, but this still looked super suspicious. I really couldn't see the guy's face at all. Plus, it was really dark out there. The more suspicious thing, though, was that he was standing in my bushes and knocking on my living room window. My house was not super close to the street either. You would have to walk through the whole front yard to get to it. After seeing the guy, I got up from the couch quickly to put some distance between us. I moved back to the edge of the living room. However, the man did not move. The guy still stood there looking at me, but also sort of looking down kind of. He didn't wave or say anything. I kept watching him, and he kept seemingly watching me. After probably a minute or two, I yelled at him. I asked him what he was doing. At first, the guy did nothing. He didn't answer me. He didn't even really react. Then, he moved away from the window to the side, going out of my view. It did not appear as though he was going off my property, but just to another area of the house. I moved out of the living room to try to figure out where he went. He had gone in the direction of my bedroom, so I went there and looked out of the window, but I didn't see him. Then I went around my house looking out of every window. I didn't see the man anywhere. It was possible that he had left my property, and I was hoping that was the case. My front and backyards are not that big, but I do have some trees and bushes. Plus, there really isn't much lighting at all, so I couldn't really see. I went around looking out of the windows from all angles. I went into the kitchen to look into the backyard, and I still didn't see the guy. So I decided to go outside to look. I wasn't trying to hunt him down or anything. I just wanted to verify that he was off my property and the vicinity for my own peace of mind. So I went out the front door and then walked around my house looking. I didn't see the guy at all, and I felt fairly confident that he was gone by now. What that was all about, I didn't know, but I went back inside and tried to relax again before bed. It was pretty late by now, and I had been planning on going to bed pretty soon anyways. I was up in the living room for a little while longer and nothing happened, so I went to bed. However, I found it very hard to get to sleep. I wasn't tired anymore, and I was feeling paranoid from the strange man at my window. I laid there in bed for probably 30 minutes trying to fall asleep. Then, as I was laying there, I heard the sound of somebody loudly trying to enter my back door. Thankfully, it was locked. I got up and I started turning on all the lights in my house. I also called the cops. Then I started looking out of all the windows. I didn't see anything. I'm guessing that it was the same guy, but he was gone now. When the police got there, I told them about what happened. I gave them a description and they said that they would look around. But after searching my property in the immediate area, they didn't locate him. He hasn't been back since, and I'm hoping that I never see that guy again. Two years ago, I was driving back from Oklahoma, and it was a pretty long drive. I would be stopping and staying overnight at a hotel, and I decided to just find a cheap one. I'm not a picky person, and for just one night of travel, I just chose to stay in a pretty crappy motel. This is something that I probably won't do again though. I just figured at the time I would have a bed, a TV, and a place to sleep for the night. Plus, I would be saving money. It didn't seem like a big deal, so I drove until about 9 p.m. and then came across a small town. It wasn't a large city or anything, and honestly I have no clue where it was. But I figured that it would be a good time to stop, because I didn't know where the next city would be. I drove until I found this cheap motel on the edge of the city. Right away it looked kinda sketchy, and like there was nobody else there. But I didn't care. I figured, what could happen? I'm just staying here one night. So I parked my car and then went to the office and got a room. It was cheap, only $40 for the night, and I got a key to one of the rooms. The motel was 2 levels and had the standard small rooms that would open up to a sidewalk that was just in front of the parking lot. The parking spaces went almost right up to the room doors. So I got my room, which was on the 1st level. I'm not sure how many other people were staying there that night, but if I had to guess, it was less than 5. So after making it to my room, I looked around and was pleasantly surprised. Nothing seemed too dirty or anything. The bed was decently comfortable and the cable TV worked fine. It wasn't that large or the greatest quality, but I felt good knowing how much money I was saving. Had I been traveling with somebody else, I probably would not have stayed there, but for just me, it was cool. Even though it was nighttime, I really wasn't that tired, so I just got into bed and started watching TV and relaxing. Probably 30 minutes later or so, I remember hearing a really loud car engine. I thought it was a truck because it sounded almost like a diesel engine. It got louder and then sounded like it was literally right outside my room. I ignored it at first, but the sound continued for a good 10 or maybe even 20 minutes. After a while, it was getting annoying, so I got up and walked over to the window. The window to the room was completely covered by the shades. I pulled them back a little to see that there was an old beat-up looking car parked right out in front of my room. The car was rather small, looked to be from the mid-1990s, and had some noticeable duct tape on it. I was kind of annoyed because there were so many empty parking spaces in the lot. Why was somebody parking right in front of my room and running their loud engine for so long? But I guess you get what you pay for, and I paid just $40 for the room that night. I was starting to regret my decision already, because I could have easily afforded a better hotel, but I was just being cheap. But overall, it wasn't a huge deal to me, so I went back to the bed and continued watching TV. After a little while, the engine to the car turned off, and things were quiet again, so I paid it no mind. A short time later, though, I was sure that I heard somebody trying to open the door to my room. It was very quiet, and I barely heard it, but there was also really no mistaking it. I had a bad feeling, and I got up from the bed and slowly walked over to the window first. When I did, I looked and nobody was there. So either I was just hearing things or whoever had tried to enter my place had left. I went back to the bed again and tried to forget about it. Things went well for the next hour or so. I still wasn't tired, but got pretty hungry as well as thirsty. I knew there was a vending machine up the stairs, so I decided to leave my room to get something. After grabbing a few dollars, I left the room and went outside. Things were very quiet out there, and I didn't see anybody at all. So I walked over to the gap between the two buildings and went up the stairs. At the second level, up against one of the buildings, were two vending machines. As I approached them, I noticed somebody was outside of the rooms on the second level. However, I didn't look closely at them and I didn't pay them much attention. So I went to the vending machine and made my selections. Afterwards, I turned around to leave, and I saw the man who had been standing outside of the rooms. It was the same guy who had been at my door. The guy was at the end of the walkway on the second level and had been there the whole time that I was there. He appeared to just kind of be standing around, and after noticing me, I saw him start to walk in my direction. I didn't know if he was going over to me or if he was just moving in my direction. I was already moving to go to the stairs though. I didn't stop around to wait, and I kept going. I went back down the stairs, took a left, and then headed back to my room. When I got back, I quickly went inside and locked the door. Then I sat back down. It was maybe 2 minutes later when I heard a knock on my door. I got up, went over to the window, and carefully looked out. That same guy was there. He was acting really suspicious, and I didn't know what he wanted. I thought maybe he was staying in one of the rooms upstairs, but why would he knock on my door? There was no way I was answering it, so I just stayed in my room and hoped that he would go away. He knocked one more time though, and I still did nothing. After maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, I heard the loud car starting right outside my room. I went over to the window and looked out, and then saw the guy driving away. I was glad that he was gone. For the rest of the night, he did not return, and when I got up the next morning, he wasn't there either. Looking back, I don't know what was going on there, but I think that the guy was being really suspicious. I'm never staying in a cheap motel like that again. This happened back many years ago. I was in high school in the early 2000s, and one night my parents went out. They left me and my older sister at home, so it would just be the two of us at the house for dinner. Now, at the time, my older sister was 17 years old, and I was 14. We lived in a house in a pretty typical neighborhood. Our parents left us some money to order a pizza or something, and that was the plan. When it got to be like 7 p.m., I told my sister that I was hungry and we should order from this one pizza place that was my favorite. She agreed, and then she called the store with our order. Around 20 minutes later or so, we were just in the living room watching TV, and the doorbell rang. My sister got up and answered with the money that our parents left us. I was like half paying attention as I was more focused on the TV. I heard my sister answer the door and the pizza guy say hello and stuff. I remember that I heard the pizza man ask my sister if she was home by herself, and she replied just saying no. The man said something like, "Oh really?" He couldn't see me from where I was in the living room. The guy said something else, but I couldn't really hear it. I heard my sister respond, but couldn't really make out what she was saying either, but it sounded like she was talking in a kind of rude way. I looked over at that point and saw that my sister appeared kind of annoyed. She handed the money to the guy, and then as he was still saying to have a good night, she slammed the door in his face. Then my sister locked the door as soon as it was shut, sighed, and started walking back over to the living room. I asked her what that was all about. She said, "I forgot about that creep." She went on to say that she was at her friend's house like 2 weeks prior, and the two of them had ordered a pizza. The same delivery guy was the one to show up. I guess that he acted really creepy, trying to flirt with my sister and her friend, and he even asked to come inside the house. They practically had to yell at him to leave and slam the door in his face. She said that she was planning to not order from that pizza place anymore because of him, but forgot about it. I thought that was weird, but I was glad that he was gone now and we had the pizza. I remember that just about 20 or 30 minutes later though, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like a car door closing. I looked out of the living room window and I saw the same pizza guy walking up to the house again. He had a small box in his hands and I wondered why he was at our house again. We hadn't ordered anything else. I warned my sister and she got up and said that she was going to call the police. Before she could though, the man started ringing the doorbell again. My sister and I ignored it at first. Then there was a knock on the door. My sister walked over to the door, did not open it or anything, but yelled at the man to go away. He yelled back from the other side, saying that he brought her a free brownie. She said she didn't want it and was going to call the police if he didn't leave now. What the man said next really creeped me out. He said that he knew my sister was alone and asked for her to let him in. That's when I knew I had to do something. This guy apparently really thought that she was home alone. I stood up and walked over to the door. Then, trying to sound tough, I yelled really loud in my manliest voice that I was also home and that I was going to come out and beat him to a pulp if he didn't leave. At first, I thought it didn't work. The man said something like, "Who's this tough guy?" He still stood around on the front step and didn't seem too affected, as my sister was now dialing the police. The guy laughed a little, as if trying to sound like the whole thing was a joke to him. Then, he finally turned and started walking off. I remember that he walked back to his car and then got in and drove away. The police still came to our house a while later though. My sister made a report and then the cops went to his work. I heard that the man later got fired. Thankfully, he did not come back to our house again after that. I'm glad that I was home that night and was able to help out my sister. The guy was a total creep, and hopefully he didn't harass anyone else like that.